Hi guys, this is Lighting 3D for VFX Houdini edition, and what I'm going to be doing is similar to my last two tutorials. There was one called Lighting 3D for VFX Maya and Lighting 3D for VFX Basic Com. I can't remember the full name of the video, but it's on my channel and it's just the one before this. Anyway, we're going to be looking at Houdini lighting to create something like this that can then be composited in this same way. I'm not going to do the comp in this video. You can check the last video. There will be timestamps in the in the description, sorry, and also a link to the scene I create in Houdini. And if you are a Patreon, then you can get that scene and previous tutorial videos, I think the last 7, to download for free, and you'll be added into a Discord as well, where there's a few of us there. You can ask me any questions and I will respond. So we're going to create a Houdini scene like this. So if you want to skip ahead at any point, please just go down to the timestamps. And yeah, so I'll start with a fresh scene, but this is the backup one. Right. By the way, with the files, you do get a short clip from a short film, which you saw there. It's just this man walking across, basically, and it's got a loose camera set up. So I've exported stuff from Maya. So this is gonna show you the workflow when working from Maya to Houdini, because there is a scale change. So what we're going to do first now is, if you've downloaded the files as well, this will be 100% relevant because I'm going to give you access to the files if you do download them. So go File, Import, Alembic Scene. So this is how we're going to import the camera. If you're doing your own project at home and you need to import or export camera from Maya into Houdini, at the top shelf of Maya there will be Alembic, and then click the camera and do Alembic, then export selected Alembic, and then you will find it in the cache file, because an Alembic file is a cache called Alembic cache.abc. And you see I've got the field canon there as well. That's how we're going to bring stuff into Houdini as well. So there we go, and then we hit import. You can import a sequence. This is just a stationary camera, so I didn't need to do anything else. And so now this is in our object tab. Don't worry if you don't know Houdini very well, because I've been using it for about 4 or 5 years, but not all the time because I'm a generalist. So I only use it for lighting and rendering. So I know how to do that fairly well, but nothing else. So we're in the objects area, as you can see. If we double click in there, you'll see it brings us in. So it's got render cam, you can see our location, all that, yada, yada, yada. The only thing to be aware of, if we keep clicking in, so now we can actually see the camera shape. If you want to change your render resolution, I would recommend doing it here. So change that. The default was 1280 by 20, but my footage is HD. Just change that. Now it's the object. Let's import the field camera. The field canon. So I hit tab, typed in geometry. Now I've got this Geo1. I'm going to call this field canon. So the way, it depends on who you work for, some of them will do it self-contained, so I'm going to do it self-contained. What that means is this node that I've just created here, I'm going to put in the field canon and I'm going to apply and create shaders for it. So if I ever needed to give it to someone else for a different shot, they could literally copy and paste this node into their scene. Or export, import. It's very convenient in that sense. So hit tab, double click, go inside the geometry node. Just going to type Alembic, A-L. Cool. Hit enter. So there's the Alembic. It creates that random cube. Yeah, I can ignore that. Select the field canon, cache similar to where the camera was, and then we can create a material node. So I type in mat for material, connect these two up, and then I'm going to hit tab and type in mat net, and yeah, it comes up with material network. This is where the shader is going to live. Inside here, I'm going to type principal shader. That's what we want. And now I'm going to call this field canon. Oops, whoa, lag. Canon underscore. Okay, so I've got the field canon underscore mat. So I don't really want this to be a tutorial, but what I'm going to do is I will tell you what nodes to make. So to plug in textures, there are a couple of ways you could do this. There's one way, which is the more Maya familiar way, where you create a texture node, you put in your texture in the texture map, and then you plug it in to the various things here. So we'll do it that way. I'm doing that at my current workplace. But one before, what they would get you to do, apparently this is more efficient, but you select your shader and you go to textures, you load them in here, you'll look dev by the shader. So that's where Houdini can get a bit more, has a bit more power, because you can actually go like the shader if you right click on it and go allow editing of content and double click on it, and it should, cool. So if you wanted to like, method I told you, then what you would have to do is, for example, if you plugged in a base color, if you want some color correction, you can literally just put a color correct node there, bring out your base color into there, and then just make sure all these connections here you just plug in. So it might be best in that case to put a null down and just have everything connected into the null like that. So that's another way that I worked on a certain advert, which is still playing since last year. But for this video, yeah, I'm going to do them all. Also, files are, I believe, Houdini MIP map files, so they are basically more efficient, but we're not going to do that. So anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect up my textures, and then I will start recording again.
2,000 years later.
Okay, so now you can see what I've got. I've got two shaders actually. So I've got one for the field canon and one for the equipment as well. And what I've done here, so I've created, these are most texture nodes. So I've got the field canon albedo, and then I connect the color out to the base color. So the reason these are green, so all these different colors mean different types of information. So the green is a vector. So the I really care about most of the time is the green and these cyan bluey ones. So that's float information as well. And so this is the roughness map, so that's texture, so it's going out vector into float. Luckily it doesn't really matter, because these are the RGB channels information that would go from, because there's a node called whoops, spelled that wrong, vector float. Oh, I spelled it wrong again. Oh my gosh. There's just lag. Vector to float. Yeah, if different IDs or different information, like you could do that in Substance Paint, different maps and IDs for different color channels. You would then be able to plug your vector, so all three color channels, into this vector to float, and then you would have, that would be your red channel, green channel, blue channel. So it's a way of, you can make really efficient IDs and then create render passes out of them. Also, if you actually want to render out any of these textures, so if you make an ID and then you wanted to see what your red channel, green channel, blue channel look like, you can also create a node called a bind export. I also use this if I'm having issues actually just seeing things like reflections and stuff like that. So you would create the bind export. Then, for example, if our base color pass was not working, we could just override it and then put that in there into the input. Rename, so the default, and we could just call it, I don't know, diffuse. And for being neat and tidy, we would call this bind underscore diffuse. Then what we would do in the ROP, I'll show you in a bit, but we will just, you would just literally just create a new image plane, so a new render pass, and call it, call the name diffuse, and it should up, and you can do that with a variety of things. Okay, so for the metallic pass, same thing to metallic. The only one that differs is the normal pass. So what in here, this is a displacement texture. So hit tab, search displacement texture. You can see for a normal map, then you change it to normal, obviously. Let's just open this bit. You can bump map as well, but I don't really do that anymore, to be honest. Like in Maya, you can combine them. I've mentioned that in one of my tutorials before, so that's kind of okay, but I would just stick to normal and displacement. And then you just put in the texture path. If you are creating textures in other software for Houdini, make sure your format is OpenGL, not DirectX, okay? So if you're using Substance Painter, make sure you do that. So you do, once you select your texture, you do Alt N into base N. If I had a displacement map as well, which I didn't make this asset.
6.5 hours
I would
later.
change it to displacement along normal and do D distance into the disp, and there we go. Just as well as that, I would need to make sure that there is some form of subdivide occurring on my model, otherwise it will die. Well, explode. Then on the other side, you can see the same thing. Don't need to talk about that, so I could just leave that for reference. Okay, now let's go back. By the way, this full screen mode, to do that, press Control and B on your keyboard. I don't know if it's the same on the Mac. I don't own a Mac. I'm going to rename this alembic to field_canon. If we want to see it in the viewport, I'm going to press Control and F. That's pretty much like F in Maya, but you have to press, sorry, not spacebar plus F at the same time. And now we need to make sure we're viewing the real area, because basically whatever you're viewing inside this geometry node, that will be what gets rendered. So in here, now what we do is we need to assign the shaders. So it says number of materials. So I've got 2 now. And we need to pick the materials. So let's go here. Let's pick the Canon one first. Field Canon. And then when it says group, there are a number of ways to do this. So we can create groups, or we could blast out parts of it. But basically, for this purpose of the tutorial, the fastest is just to select this. If it will select, there's something else. And then I just hit enter. And so it'll assign to what my selection was. Let's go to number 2, material 2. Click on the equipment, press on the cursor, and oh, can I get all that? Yeah. So that will work now. That will assign. But if I hit tab, I'll show you a few examples. You could also plug in a blast node. And when I view the blast node, there is nothing there, because in the blast, you're basically blasting points out. You can use other methods of that. So with the blast node selected, I clicked on the selection arrow up here. Then I've selected the Canon, and I hit enter, and it just says group 4. So it's actually looking at the vertex. That's very easy to do that, but the thing is, if someone else, if there's like a modeler providing you the model and then they change it, this will change the points as well. Yeah, that's a positive way of doing it. There are other methods. You can use wildcards as well, such as asterisks. You can put field asterisks, and then depending on what the object is named as, and then it needs to be unpacked as well. But this is not. Yeah, when you bring in as an alembic, you need to either unpack it, or you can change primitive groups and go to name group using transform node full path, and that will just give you more information. They'll give you the full information about the model. You can go into the geometry spreadsheet and the primitives, and we can see some of the information here about the names. So you can use wildcards. There's another way of doing that as well. A wildcard is just to select something. Actually, let's load up the blast again. So as an example, another method. I can't remember if this is for blast or group nodes as well, but you would type in equals at path colon field, because I've got a field canon in there, and that would link you up to a thing. But at the moment I'm getting valid group because it can't find anything. Right, so let's select the material and let's go to the scene graph. Okay, to be aware of before I start adding lights or doing anything else, there is these are from Maya. Is different, so I'm going to create a null object area. Unit in Houdini is pretty much 1 meter, and in Maya by default it's 1 centimeter. So what we can do, depending where you work, this will differ. Sometimes you need to reduce the scale of your model when you're exporting to Houdini, but at some place that I did work, we just did it this way. So we had like scale down underscore null. So we just create a null in the uniform scale. We just put 0.01. So in Maya, these the camera and the field canon are done to scale, real world scale that is. So now they just need to be brought to real world scale in Houdini, and shrunk it down a bit, both of those. So that's all good. Right, let's move on to lighting. Okay, so we're going to start by creating an environment light. I was going to call this HDR, but it's not really an HDR. It's a reflection image that I create, but we are going to use it to emit color. It's very like cheap cowboy things, really. So this is not a proper HDR. I mentioned that in one of my other videos. So you can go to the environment map, and let's find it. So where do I put it? Probably assets. Yeah, reflection plate. And there we go. So we have that there, and if we set this, will ID that we can separate lighting, compositing, or actually, yeah, for the comp guys really. So let's put 0 there. And I'm actually going to change the name of the light just so if you work with other people, then they will know, or just for your own as well. Put IBL image-based light underscore ID 0. So we know, okay, that's going to contribute to degree 0 if we put a render pass to 0. And let's also, actually, I'll create the ROP now. So you go to the Out tab to do all the render stuff. And I'm going to hit tab and search for Mantra. I'm using Mantra as the default renderer for Houdini. So that's what we need to do. And let's pick the camera. There is the render camera. I'm not going to change any of these settings by default apart from this objects bit. So I'm going to delete delete those 2 asterisks. On force objects, I'm just going to pick the field. And force light, I'm going to put an asterisk. That's the thing, basically. And images, if you click on images, go to extra image planes. We're not going to add anything for the moment, but we will shortly. Now let's actually test render now. I will just double check in my object area that I selected the material node, so that's where the materials get assigned. Okay, that looks good to me. And so I go onto the render view tab, and then you can see it's got that out mantra there, so that it will be what I just set up in that ROP.
6.5 hours later.
Okay, so this is the render straight off the bat, and as you can see, it's not too bad. So that's just with that reflection thing that I created. So I'm going to save a snapshot, just that button there. The problem is though, using just an HDR to light, it softens the shot, which in this instance isn't too bad, but it can be more expensive to render. So I'd be inclined to reduce the exposure down. So I've gone back to the object menu and I'm reducing exposure down by 1. I'm going to key light, so I'm going to hit tab, type in a light, place that down, and call this key or LGT. I'm getting a lag, so it keeps missing keys. And then type ID 01, and then in categories put a 1. I'm going to change the type from point, which is the default, to we could do grid or disk. Let's do disk. Then go to the scene view. Alt right zooms out if you didn't already know that. Alt and left click rotates around. Okay, so there is our key light. Let's put it out a bit. And I'm using constraints to be fair. I've done quite a lot of lighting over the years. So with the light selected, go to the constraints tab, click look at, then hit enter once, and again for the second time. And on the right hand side, it's created these few nodes here. And so it's actually constrained our key light to a null. So it's just like a locator within my, if you've used my. Now I'm going to locate null to key underscore light underscore const. And I'm going to select the null and then move it to where this cannon is. And then I'm going to pick the light up and move it to be more above the cannon. So I know there'll be some level of key there. And then in terms of the color, let's go to the render. So we can really cheat. Go to the color and we can select the color and we can use the color picker and pick the sky up there. And yeah, that'll be fine for the moment. And we can just re-render, so I'll do that now.
A few moments later.
Okay, so this is how the render is now looking with the key light. So there's not too much of a change there. I did have to close and reopen my Houdini, so unfortunately I don't have the before and after render, but it's looking like this at the moment. And the thing is, if we look in our render passes, which are here, we don't have a split out of the lights. So at this point, it might be useful to actually turn this on. So by doing that, we can go into the images. And there's actually two I'm going to turn on, but one I will explain in a bit. Combined emission, I'm going to turn that on because we're going to create a background which will emit color onto the asset as well. And then what we want is we want direct lighting, but because we've got these light variables, these categories that we've selected, on the light exports, go to export variable for each light. And so if I hit and render again, it should hopefully come up with the extra lights but separated. And as you can see, even though it's still rendering, we've got the IBL ID 0 direct and key light ID 01 direct. So it actually gives them that name that we included, so it will be useful for compositors as well. So if they're looking for particular IDs of lights and stuff like that. And then we can look at one, so that's the direct lighting coming from that environment light. And then that's what's coming from the key light as well. So the key light is there just to give the main light direction, whereas this IBL is just created in Photoshop, so it's probably, although it looks okay, it's not as controllable really. So yeah, let's go back to the objects area, and I'm actually going to bring down that, I'll save a snapshot. Oh, by the way, the emissions, all emission, obviously that's empty, so I'll confirm that. So now what we want to do, I'm going to show you two ways of doing things. So we can use that environment, so the footage, to give off light or emit light. Now these are two different things. I've covered one, or I might have covered both in my Maya tutorial, but I can't fully remember. But anyway, hit tab. We're going to have to do the same thing for both methods anyway, so I'm going to create two geometry nodes. So create a geometry node, and we're going to call this projection underscore cards. Let's call it that. And go inside, and let's hit tab, create a grid. So this is just going to be some floor. Rows and columns can be 1 by 1, or maybe not, 2 by 2. Yeah, we just want to get rid of the polygon amount. We don't need any polygons really. The size, let's do, I don't know, 30 by 30. Yep, just want to cover enough surface of this thingy, this asset. And from there, what we want is, I'm going to hit tab to search grid. So we're going to get another grid. And with this one highlighted, I'm going to hit tab and search bend. I'm going to plug in this bend. And what we want to do is, oh, I need to be viewing in the bend. You see, we're creating a bend. So this is going to be a behind card for the field cannon. So below the bend, then I'm going to create a transform node to then move it. I've noticed it's more convenient, really, if you're using cards, you want to bend them, just to do the bend first and then transform it. Just because of where the bend deformers are based, more in like the center of the universe. You could change them, but I just hate the bend. Like, I'm not particularly a Houdini fan. So I just hate the bend deformer. Actually, even when I was trying to transform there, it wasn't coming up with the manipulator. So you notice I selected it and I hit enter again. So just be aware you could do that. Sometimes if a node is not doing anything, select the node and in your scene view, hit enter. Okay, let's change -90 on the rotate, and we need to do 90 on another one. Whoops, that's the wrong one. Do 90. Oh, screw it. I'll do this. Oh, yeah. There we go. I think we need to make it bigger. So we just want this curve bit to encapsulate the cannon a bit more. I've used this. I've done this very, very recently on a TV show which is coming out in the next few months, I think, to do with dinosaurs, BBC show. But it was a chase sequence with the dinosaurs, and to get some nice lighting as well as having rim lights, there was a projection card like this. Well, like literally exactly what I'm doing now. So yeah, where was I? The grid. Let's add some more subdivisions for the grid too. So let's do 20 by 20 just to make it a smoother curve. And let's join up the grid one and view the merge. So now we can see both. They're both now one object, basically. And actually, I might need to move my grid one. I'm actually gonna transform it down slightly, just because it's intersecting with that sand spike thingamajig. So let's move it down. Whoa, that's loads. Okay, so it's one. Take a look. Actually, that is a huge amount. Tiny bit more. I think that'll be fine, really. Okay, now what we're going to do is, okay, so we want to project the footage onto here, so we need to UV these two grids, because if we don't, otherwise what's going to happen is you know, best case scenario, it's going to tile the footage. So, you know, if you're not sure of this method ever working, just make sure you render the planes, you put them into your force objects so you can actually see them, because we're not going to do that later. We'll put them in force phantom. Anyway, for create a UV texture node, go to texture type, change that to perspective from camera, go to the camera, add the render camera shape as well, hit tab, search for material. So now we need to apply a shader, so we're going to create a shader. Let's view there. We don't need to put a group because it's just going to read anything there, basically. So I'm going to hit tab, type mat net, and create a material network. The reason for doing this, we could use the other material network, but I like having objects self-contained. It's super convenient. So I hit tab again, press principal shader, search for principal shader. Let's just call this projection. Base color doesn't really matter, but 0, 0, 0, roughness 1, reflectivity 0. Scroll all the way down. In emission, we want 1, 1, 1. So now it's going to be emitting white, but we don't want that. So we go to the texture bit. You know, some of those, it's worth mentioning, some of these settings here are basically like multipliers for the textures you input. So that's something to keep in mind, like with the, especially with the base color. So if I was going to put in a base color texture, you would want to put 1, 1, 1. So yeah, for future reference. So same, if you want to do emission, you need to make sure you put it on 1, 1, 1, or it won't emit anything. Or if it does, it'll dim it down. Okay, let's put in the footage. So I've got a TIFF sequence. I think there are 3 different formats of the sequence, so pick whatever you fancy. JPEGs are not as good, obviously. So that's the TIFF sequence. You notice that Houdini adds $F, that's for a frame range. Oh, also for if you are doing a UDIM sequence for your textures, you would type in, so let's say this was a UDIM texture sequence, you would type in percentage, open bracket, UDIM, close bracket, D, and that would load the UDIMs for your textures. So let's just put $, where's the $ key, $F. There we go. That should be fine. Actually, let's just check that it is loading that. Yeah, it should just put it there anyway. Okay, now let's go back. In the materials bit, we could just go there, matte nets, projection. Wonderful. You see it's just changed color. Now let's go back to the ROP in the out area, so the output bit. Go to objects, and if we put it in force objects, then we'll be able to see it in the render. So I can just do that now just to take a look. But what we actually want is we want it in force phantom. But force objects can be good if you just want to check that it's actually working and it's actually visible, because what we can do is we can close the oh, okay, I've got an error with my footage loading, so I just need to double check that and I'll start recording again.
1 eternity later.
Okay, so now this is what the render is looking like. What I had to do as well, I changed to the EXR sequence in the matte net, so in the projection. It wasn't reading in, I think it's to do with the frame numbering, because normally your sequences would start 1001 to whatever, but I think mine starts from 0 or something, because it's just some old footage I found. I should have reformatted and exported again. Anyway, so what we're seeing here, this is actually the projected footage, which is good, but as you can see, the sky is on the floor partly. So as a quick fix, if we look in the scene area, so to view the projection as I'm seeing it now, just make sure this is turned on, display materials on object, and just a headlight only. And look, I've gone back to the object area and then projection cards. I'll click in the transform node for grid 1 and I can just do a really lazy method, just that, because it's just visual noise. That's all we really need. There we go. So I'm going to save a snapshot, and what you'll notice is these highlights will change. So this is all coming from the emission. So if you remember further back in the video, if you've been watching all the way, I turned on in the ROP the emissions. So what we can do is we can actually separate that. But let's have a quick look at this render first. Okay, so that's looking way better. Let's look at before, so that, and after. And now if we look in the render passes and I go to all emission, that is now purely the contribution from our projection plane, because that is the only thing being emitted into the environment. And then our direct passes, which are the direct light rays. So if you watch my compositing tutorial, you know that you can use basically 3 passes. You can separate out the direct lighting passes to alter the lights within compositing. But yeah, no, that's great. Okay, so now I'm going to show you another method of doing that, because emission, you know, if you're just emitting from one object, that could be fine. But let's say we want to have it as a light ID. So we want the same effect, but we just want it more controllable as a light. So so we'll turn this one off in a bit. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this node and hold down Alt and just drag it. I'm going to rename it to projection underscore lights underscore geo. So now, what do I need? I don't need any of this. So in this one, I'm just going to delete all of that. And I'm going to just view the merge. I'm going to go back to the object area and hide the old one. Okay, so this is what we've got. This is the projection light, and now what I need to do is hit tab, search for a light, and we're going to call this geo light. So geo underscore light underscore ID 02. So as you can see, we've got ID 0, ID 01, ID 02. So in the geo light, let's go to categories, put the number 2 there, change the type to geometry, go to the area light options, and select object. We're going to go there. We'll just scroll down to our projection light object. So by selecting that, it will select, you know, every input. But it's worth mentioning now that sometimes it's worth creating a null at the very end of your connection. If you just create a null, actually this is a very common occurrence in most companies. So you would just put out light geo or out whatever, and just make sure that's connected at the end and being readable at the end there. Okay, so geometry object, I'm just going to select the whole thing, it doesn't really matter. And the texture would be the footage. So I'm just going to select that, and it's a sequence, so it's going to play that through as well. And what else? That should be alright. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back to the render settings. I'm going to get rid of the projection cards. By the way, the projection cards, that emission method, you would actually put that in force phantom, and what that will do is just not render the objects, but it will give off the, you know, it gives off shadows and color spill into your scene. But we're not using that now, so we've just got force lights for all the lights, so that's all we need. I'm going to hit render and see what that looks like. Okay, so this is now what our render looks like. Let's do it before and after. So that was with the emission board, so you can actually see where I turned off the background for that one. So that's why we're getting weird distortion of where the footage is. Now in this new render, I went back to this display option and I turned on the footage again, just so I can see something. But if we do before and after, I actually prefer this, and because it's got a category separated, now you can see I've got GeoLight 0 ID 02 in the direct. We can see it's very faint. I don't know if you can see on the screen. I'll turn that up. But that's what it's looking like, and then our key light, that's what it's doing, and then our IBL is giving a lot of contribution. So yeah, one little extra thing to add is how to quickly set up shadow passes for the scene. I forgot to add it into the video earlier, but we're going to create something like this so that we have a direct shadow pass. And what we could do is take that into Nuke, similar to the Maya one, and then invert this and multiply with a merge node into our composite. So to do that, go to your object area, hit tab and search grid, and I didn't hit enter, but if you hit enter then it will create this. So we just have a grid there. I made it 20 by 20 so it fit underneath the field cannon, and then I just went back to the object area, named it ground shadows underscore ground. Then go to the out area, hit tab, search for mantra again or whatever your render is, hit enter, make a mantra node, and all I did was in the objects area, force objects, I put the new shadows underscore ground, so that's just the grid. Force phantom, so shadowing, I put the cannon, and for force lights, rather than just an asterisk to include all the lights, I just want the key light just to cast a prominent shadow, because that's going to be the key direction of the light. And then in the images area, scroll down to extra image planes, press 1 here, and go to direct shadow, which is here. So now when I look at the render, so that's what it looks like with my footage still in the back, so it looks a bit confusing. So if I delete that, then it'd be that, which is a bit confusing as well. So if I press A for alpha, then you notice, oh, it looks like we've got an issue here. I'm going to press C for color again, so we're looking at the color channel. But because we have direct shadow on, you can see now we've got a full black screen and white there. So it means we can use a shuffle node to shuffle this out in Nuke, and then invert it to make it black and white, and then use a merge node with multiply on top of our composite, just like in my other videos. Anyway, that's how we do a super quick shadow pass, so I hope that's useful. So that's basically just a few methods that I've been using for lighting and VFX. And then I guess aside from that, if you set up those for your passes so you could control the lighting within compositing, all you'd need is to add in your ROP, an indirect and perhaps a diffuse pass as well, and you would be fine. I still have the all emission pass added, or turned on I should say, but I don't need it. So that is just if you are still going to keep using the projection cards that we were using earlier. But anyway, I'm going to leave it there. So hopefully that's helped you out. So from this render area, there would just be an option to actually render to disk, and you would set that up, set the save location, and there we go. So yeah, if you would like to download the scene files, there'll be a link below, or if you become a patron, you get access to the scene files and the one from like the last 7 or 8 videos, as well as being added into the Discord as well. I hope you found that useful. Thanks.